Hello, I'm Bret Wood. I produce Blu-rays and DVDs for Kino Classics, and am also a filmmaker and film historian. As a writer, the credentials most relevant to this particular film are the book Orson Welles, a biobibliography, which I compiled in 1991, and the essay Recognizing the Stranger, which appeared in Video Watchdog magazine in 1994. I've always felt that The Stranger, even though it has its share of admirers, has been undervalued in the filmography of Orson Welles. While it may lack the, what I'd call, stylistic swagger of a film like Citizen Kane or The Magnificent Ambersons, don't be fooled. The film is deceptive and much more complex than it at first appears, both stylistically and thematically. When possible, I'm going to try and talk specifically about the scenes on screen, so excuse me if I bounce around a lot between scene-specific commentary and more general observations about the making of the film. And some of the most important material is in the first reel, so we'll just dive right into the details and then backtrack to cover the generalities. The second shot of the film is loaded. When we first see Edward G. Robinson, we're looking down at him, and there's a reason we're looking down, and I'll go into that later. Unfortunately, the set was not designed for filming at this angle, so when we look down, we see the floor of the studio through the window pane. You could argue that this is part of the roof of the War Crimes Commission building, but if that's the roof, why is there a tree growing out of it? Not 2 minutes in, and you can already see that Welles's creative vision is running into conflict with the scale of production. Since this is a high-definition transfer, you can see that the focus puller is not able to keep Robinson in focus. That's something that could have been improved upon with additional takes, but clearly that wasn't in the budget. The opening reel of The Stranger is the one I want to talk about the most, not because of what you're seeing, but because of what you're not seeing. When Welles was given the screenplay by Anthony Weiler, he wanted to personalize it and add some of his own ideas, and he put most of these in the first reel as a sort of introduction. He wanted to establish a nightmarish tone to the film and planned to do so by showing the process by which the Nazi war criminal, Konrad Meinecke, played by Konstantin Shane, made his way from Czechoslovakia to America. Not just a small sequence, but about 20 pages of material. Scraps of these scenes remain in the film, but they're whittled down to little more than a transitional montage. Pay attention to how long this shot lasts, and notice how much choreographed camera movement there is. Again, we're looking down on Meinecke for a reason, and in a moment we will look up towards Wilson. Throughout the film, Welles uses vertical space as an illustration of power. Who has the upper hand, so to speak? We know it's Wilson because of the pipe. I'm not quite sure why his face is hidden. Either Welles wanted to emphasize the pipe as the identifying feature, or it could be that Robinson just wasn't available to shoot that day, and so putting his face behind the sign was a way to cover it up. Wait a minute, is that a dissolve? And so Welles's elaborately designed crane shot, not unlike the opening of Touch of Evil, albeit on a smaller scale, gets gutted, because the editor didn't want to waste time showing the woman agent zigzag down the walkway. And who knows what else was lost in that shot. The screenplay identifies the woman agent as Senora Marvales. And notice her earrings for a moment. You're supposed to. They're there for a reason. There's a really nice sound mix throughout this sequence. That's something Welles attempted to do with music in The Lady from Shanghai and Touch of Evil, having characters wander through public spaces with different flavors of music weaving in and out of the mix. But in both of those films, the studio largely disregarded his instructions. It more or less survives here. Score 1 point for The Stranger. The shadow figure there is Senor Marvales, her husband. Nice double exposure here to show Meinecke reflected in the camera lens. Welles learned a lot about optical printers during the making of Citizen Kane. In his draft of the script, Welles had Meinecke go to the far-bright kennels, where attack dogs are being trained, as well as beaten, by Nazis in hiding. Agent Marvales is later discovered by the Nazis and is torn apart by these abused dogs. We see her corpse brought into a morgue, and we know it's her by the distinctive earrings she's wearing. So we have the setup, the establishing of the earrings, but no payoff. It was brutal stuff, and no surprise that it didn't make it into the finished film. When Meineke tells the photographer that he has been sent there by the All-Highest, we and the photographer assume he means Hitler, but not so fast. We'll soon learn that he's referring to someone else. Note that the word All-Highest underscores Welles playing with vertical space, that the person who occupies the higher ground wields the greater power. In the script, the card Meineke receives shows how Franz Kindler's pseudonym, Rankin, was derived. If you take the name Franz and cross out the F and the Z, and then remove the DLER from Kindler, you're left with RANKIN, Rankin. The town square of Harper, Connecticut. At the time, there was some publicity around the fact that the church steeple was the tallest set ever constructed for a Hollywood picture. Hard to believe it was taller than the Babylon sets of Intolerance, but so be it. But that's not what's truly remarkable about these sets, and we'll get into that momentarily. The pipe, repaired by a piece of tape, clues Meineke in to the fact that he's being followed. He saw it briefly when he first got off the boat. The bawdy jokes playing on the radio are Welles's second attempt at something he had first tried in The Magnificent Ambersons, where a spoken-word comedy song by the Two Black Crows is playing on a Victrola in the boarding house at the end of the film. You may not know what I'm talking about because the scene was refilmed without Welles's involvement, and all that Two Black Crows material was eliminated. But we have a taste of it here, a piece of annoying lowbrow entertainment underscoring a scene of serious gravity.
There's two rats fighting in this room. He said, what do you want for $1.25? A bullfight? About 7 o'clock in the morning, the house detective knocked on the door. He said, is there a maid in your room? I said, no. So he pushed one in. She was cute.
Potter loves notes. Most of them were inked by Welles himself, you can tell by the handwriting. He also wrote some of the graffiti in the school. He loved having a hand in all aspects of production. Having Billy House chuckle in the face of the escaped Nazi, the mastermind of the death camps, is a nice bit of irony here. Now there's another nice tracking shot coming up here. The film is full of these elaborate long takes. For now, just notice them, and be aware that it's much harder to shoot a dolly shot than it is to plant a camera on sticks. We'll talk about why Welles went to all this trouble in a few minutes. Look at the windows across the square. You can see the sets on this side of the square reflected in the glass on the other side of the square. It gives an added dimension to the set. If you go frame by frame, you can also glimpse the camera crew. Someone's holding a flag. That's a rectangular piece of black felt used to shade the lens so you don't get lens flare from the sun. They move from left to right just before Meineke's reflection crosses. This idea of shooting sets with actual glass in the windows and then having a set behind you to be reflected in the glass is something Erich von Stroheim did with his film Foolish Wives. I know Welles was a big admirer of Stroheim's, but there's no way of knowing if that's where he got the idea. That's Welles's handwriting on the left side of the board. And notice the other sign there, Harper versus Todd, Tuesday night. The Harper School for Boys is an homage to the Todd School for Boys in Woodstock, Illinois, where Welles received his secondary education. The school had a profound influence upon Welles's confidence and creativity, and he had a definite nostalgia for the place and some of its traditions. This entire sequence is clearly not a set, but was shot on a borrowed location somewhere. When Meineke knocks Wilson unconscious, notice their positions within the frame. Meineke on the higher ground, Wilson down below. Meineke later tells Rankin that he, quote, felled him from on high. You can guess where I'm going with this. In the opening scene, Wilson tells the War Crimes Commission, you can threaten me with the bottom pits of hell. Bottom. Ultimately, these verbal and visual references to high and low don't really mean anything. They're just an idea that Welles is playing with, using it to give the film some cohesion, and presumably to make the final confrontation in the clock tower between good and evil somehow more significant. In a way, it's not unlike the scene in The Third Man when Harry Lime takes Holly Martins into the Ferris wheel and looks down on the people below with an air of superiority. And of course, later in the film, Lime is trapped within the sewer beneath the streets of Vienna. We see his fingers pushing up through the steel grate. No, I'm not suggesting that Welles was responsible for all that, but just showing that the high and low metaphor is fairly common in movies, like the good guy in white and the bad guy wearing black, something Welles will also toy with in this film. It's a convention of the genre that a filmmaker can simply adhere to, ignore entirely, or, as Welles is doing here, experiment with. He's seeing how many ways he can reference and reflect the idea of high and low within a film, almost like a game. Speaking of white and black, the white sheer drapes in Mary Longstreet's house, representing her innocence and purity, contrast nicely with the dark funereal appearance of Conrad Meineke. At the time he made The Stranger, Welles was still at the top of his form, but he was no longer showing off. The boy genius was now age 31, having gained a lot of experience in the meat grinder that is Hollywood. And he's conducting a new experiment to see if it's possible for him to work within the system, no longer in a privileged position, but more as a contract director. The questions he hoped to answer for himself with this film: could he make a film that would actually turn a profit? Could he make a genre picture without sacrificing his creative vision? Could he get along with producers? And could he do all this while still expressing his social and political views? He hoped to learn not only a lot about the film industry, but something about himself as well. And speak of the devil, here comes Welles now as Charles Rankin. Check out this shot. I'll time it so you don't have to. It's one of those long, uninterrupted takes that the film is just full of. But they're not done in an ostentatious way, the way the opening of Touch of Evil was, but are more simple in design. This one is about 1 minute in length. This may not seem long to you, but a 1-minute take in a Hollywood picture from the 1940s is extremely rare. Notice a few headstones are in the shot. That's to establish the proximity of the cemetery to the town square. It features more prominently towards the end of the film. Welles's draft of the screenplay actually began in the cemetery, with a pre-credit sequence in which Mary is wandering through the cemetery in a daze, and we hear the voice of Rankin reading out the names of her ancestors from the tombstones, each name followed by "died for his country," establishing the Longstreets as being of a particularly patriotic lineage. Now, this is the granddaddy of the long takes, 4 minutes long. The opening shot of Touch of Evil was only 3 minutes and 20 seconds long, although granted that one is highly orchestrated. The longest shot in any Welles film was in Macbeth, where a shot lasts an entire reel, about 10 minutes. That's the same length as the shots in Alfred Hitchcock's Rope. In Macbeth, as in The Stranger, the long shots are so subtle that you almost don't notice them. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. It may appear simple, but the camera is mounted on a rolling crane, which is maneuvered with some difficulty, and the action moves from direct sunlight into the shade, which is a difficult thing for the DP to compensate for. For this reason, sometimes when you see The Stranger on video, this part of the film appears washed out. When we did the color correction for this edition, we put a couple of subtle transitions in here, which allowed us to balance the contrast as they moved from light to dark and make it more pleasing to the eye. Something that could have been done when the 35mm negative was timed for the creation of release prints, but for some reason wasn't.
There will be another war?
So in this scene, Rankin briefly reminisces about the good old days and hints that another war is inevitable. When Rankin asks Meineke who set him free, he tells him, "The All-Highest."
Who set you free?
The All-Highest.
You don't mean?
I mean God.
And we find that he doesn't mean Hitler, he means God. And it doesn't take Rankin long to figure out that Meineke was set free in order to lead them to him.
France, all doors were open to me. All doors. It was one of God's miracles.
Once Rankin gets a grip on the situation and realizes that he can kill Meineke and protect his identity, and eliminate the only witness, the camera drops down lower and shoots up toward Rankin, showing that he is now gaining control, occupying the higher plane. So what was the purpose of all these long takes if he wasn't going to do something visually adventurous, as he had with Amberson and would later with Touch of Evil? There's a very simple explanation. Welles was trying to protect his film against the editor, Ernest Nims, and the producers. In order to make the film, he had given up creative control and the right of final cut, so he knew the film was going to be cut contrary to his instructions. But by filming scenes in long, uninterrupted takes, especially with two shots like this, it becomes very difficult for an editor to remove any footage without creating continuity jumps. In a perfect world, a director shoots a wide shot and a series of close-ups, so the editor has lots of options of things to cut away to if it becomes necessary to remove a line of dialogue or shorten a scene. That's called coverage. By shooting the action from one and only one angle, Welles was providing the editor with no coverage and giving him nothing to cut away to. Most of the time this worked and allowed Welles to protect his vision of the film. But as we saw in the shot of Agent Marvales walking down the ramp at the customs desk, it didn't always work, and sometimes Nims found a way to break up the long shots in spite of Welles's intentions. We'll see other examples of this later. The shot of Rankin praying with his eyes open is especially effective. Welles's draft of the screenplay has a sequence showing how Mary and Rankin first met. She's playing hooky from church, instead going for a walk by the lake. But Young, who wanted to preserve her squeaky clean image, insisted that her character would never skip church. So a new scene was written in which Mary and Rankin meet in church. But even that ran into potential censorship problems. The director of the Production Code Office, Joseph Breen, wrote, quote, "We assume that you will take great care with this new scene in the church to avoid anything that might appear irreverent in connection with the conversation between Rankin and Mary during the reading of the psalm. Though the script does not indicate, we assume that this conversation will be whispered in such a way as not to make the finished scene offensive." End quote. If the censors are concerned about two adults talking in church, you can imagine how they would have responded to Welles's original plan for this scene we're watching now. In the film as it exists today, Rankin hurriedly grabs the scraps of paper from the ground and changes the path of the paper chase so that Meineke's body will not be discovered. In Welles's draft of the script, Rankin takes the Bible that Meineke was carrying and tears the pages from the Bible and spreads those on the ground to divert the students. Can you imagine that happening in a Hollywood movie? The scene wasn't cut, it was just never filmed. Not even Welles could get away with that one.
This way, fellas.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered together here in the sight of God and in the face of this company.
Looking slightly up toward Rankin, who looms over Mary. Looking down at Wilson as he gradually regains consciousness. He's down, but not out. And he rises up to at least eye level. And how does this affect Rankin's position in the hierarchy of power? The next time we see him, we're looking down. He may be vulnerable after all. Frankly, the high and low thing starts to wear a little thin after a while, so I'll try and talk about something else.
In the holy estate of matrimony, wilt thou love him, comfort him, honor and keep him, in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, keep thee only unto him so long as ye both shall live.
All right, a change of subject then. The clock tower looks very odd, and that's never really addressed in the surviving version of the film. It's almost like a blot on the white face of this tower. But in the script, when Rankin first meets Mary and they're walking in the woods, he looks up at the clock and says, quote, "You know, my first impression of your town was the incongruity of a Gothic clock in a Connecticut church tower." End quote. Mary explains the origin of the clock. It was, quote, "brought by sailing ships from the shores of the Mediterranean," end quote, by one of her forefathers, Abner Longstreet. That clock sort of represents Rankin himself in a number of ways, this Gothic monstrosity that has somehow been pasted into this white-bread all-American town, and no one seems to notice that it doesn't belong. Several times throughout the film, Rankin is compared to the clock itself. I'll try and point those out as we pass. This is a good place to talk about the production design of the film. I may tend to give Welles all the glory, but I don't want to diminish the contributions of Perry Ferguson, who is one of the true heroes of The Stranger. Ferguson was the associate art director on Citizen Kane, second in command under Van Nest Polglaze. So he had worked with Welles back when the director was the toast of Hollywood and being given the full support of RKO. I think that even though Welles had fallen in stature, Ferguson still wanted to give him something spectacular, worthy of the director of Citizen Kane. When we're filming inside the drugstore, we get a sense of depth that is extremely rare in a Hollywood movie. In the shot where Wilson plays checkers with Potter, you can look behind Potter and see a mirror behind him, and through the mirror see Potter and Wilson again, and then see the window behind the camera, and see through that window to cars, buildings, and natural sunlight. It's truly radical. If it were deep focus the way Greg Toland had shot Citizen Kane, maybe it would have been noticed or written about in the last 70-odd years. But it's gone unnoticed because it is, like the long crane shots, so subtly done. One quick thing I will note, and it's completely speculative. Ferguson went on to design the sets for Rope, and I can't help but think that Hitchcock saw The Stranger, was astute enough to notice the long takes that proliferate the film, and chose Ferguson as the art director based on this. I mentioned that the most significant aspect of the set is not the height of the clock tower, it's the town square of Harper as a whole. Rather than being filmed on a series of disconnected sets, exteriors scattered across a backlot, interiors built inside studio sound stages, the downtown scenes of Harper, Connecticut were shot in one series of interlocking locations, some of which were constructed specifically for the film. If you look at the photo gallery on this disc, you'll see a diagram, kind of like a blueprint or a surveyor's chart, that shows the locations of each of the buildings in relation to one another. And yes, that poster was painted by Welles also. So the sets were built in close proximity to one another. Is that such a big deal? Well, it's a huge deal, but it's not something you'd necessarily notice unless you look closely. Welles didn't want this film to feel like it was shot on a Hollywood soundstage. In a typical movie of this budgetary level, you'd show the exterior of a building as someone walks through the front door. Once you get to the door, you cut to an interior, which was constructed and filmed on a soundstage. The outside and the inside are at two different locations. As a result, when you look out a window or through a doorway, as you did in the War Crimes Commission office, you see a painted backdrop. I still can't believe Welles allowed that scene to get past him, but I digress.
Hello, Father. Has anybody seen my brand new husband?
Notice that all the long streets have biblical names: Mary, Adam, Noah, Abner, Sarah, although it's not clear if Sarah is related to the Longstreets or not. The use of the crane here is nice and creepy, reducing Rankin to a bug or some sort of foraging animal scraping around in the mud. Then Welles contrasts the high angle with the low angle, a very formally composed shot, using the faces of Mary's family as a framing device, and the faces all direct our gaze down towards Mary. Rankin, the black shadow against the white door, as if we needed any hints about his personality.
After all, aren't we supposed to be going on a honeymoon or something?
Give me 5 minutes.
I love the moment of awkward silence right after Mary leaves the room. Clearly, Rankin has not been warmly embraced by the Longstreet family. This scene is a great example of the beauty of shooting the film on what I would call compound sets, multiple sets within view of each other. When Robinson looks out the window, we get this nice shot of the clock tower framed in the boarding house room windows. But then we cut to this shot of the tower, your typical flat soundstage shot. Blech. They tried to sell it as an authentic exterior with the pigeons and the cheap backdrop, but no dice. Now we're back on location, and picking up a little reflection on the lens of the sunlight coming through the trees. But that's what happens when you shoot into a bright sky. Nice crane shot in the church set, reinforcing the whole high versus low theme.
Hello there.
Hello.
Was that you working up there on the clock?
No, I was just cleaning around it.
Oh, it's a beautiful thing. What I can see out front. Beautiful.
We know who most of these actors are, so it's not necessary to go into much detail about Robinson, Welles, or Young. But Richard Long is not as well known. He was 18 at the time The Stranger was being filmed. This was his second film, the first being released that same year, Tomorrow is Forever, which was one of Welles's earliest acting appearances in a film by a director other than himself. Long had a respectable film career, playing handsome young men and, like many actors who never achieved superstardom in the movies, found steady work in television from the 1950s into the 1970s. Eventually, he became a leading man on several long-running series. Long played Jared Barkley on The Big Valley and Professor Everett on Nanny and the Professor. He died of a heart attack in 1974 at the young age of 47.
It's nice to be able to show it to someone who knows what Revere Silver's all about. But personally, my specialty is pewter.
Oh, yes, pewter.
Having Judge Longstreet collect Revere silver is yet another way to emphasize the family's traditional American lineage. So Mary and Rankin are returning from their honeymoon, and Wilson, meanwhile, has ingratiated himself into the Longstreet home.
Mr. Wilson, my daughter Mary.
Oh, how do you do, Mr. Wilson? I'm
My
glad to see
son-in-law,
you.
Charles Rankin.
How do you do?
How do you do?
I
Mr.
hope
Wilson.
you don't mind my intruding on you.
Mary takes a moment to greet Jeffrey, whom some people think should have married her instead of Rankin. This is another minute-long take. Nothing too elaborate visually, but that overlapping dialogue takes time to coordinate. Welles was a master of that. I don't see how Welles got away with this line when Mary's brother Noah asks of her honeymoon.
Do you remember to keep your knees together and your apparatus in?
Yes, Freshie, I did.
Mr. Wilson here is compiling a catalog.
The clock represents not only Rankin, but the mindset of fascism itself, cold, mechanical, and unfeeling. There's one passage missing from this dinner-time conversation about fascism, one in which Mary innocently explains that Rankin has often described, quote, the ideal social system in terms of a clock. The force that runs the clock, the spring or the weight or whatever it is the head of the state. The pendulum is his government, which transforms his inspirations into law. The train of gears are the working masses, formed into economic units which engage each other without friction. The teeth are individuals, and just as these are of flawless metal, well ground and polished, so must the individual be of good blood, trained and fit physically. Wilson asks, and what about the hands? Mary, you forgot the hands, Charles. Rankin, the hands stand for progress, which would not occur by fits and starts, but according to the laws of harmonic motion. Wilson, if I didn't know better, Mr. Rankin, I'd say you're no admirer of democracy, in which progressive ideas are forged in the heat of friction. Rankin, on the contrary, I'm a complete Democrat, as of this year of our Lord. What Mary was telling you has to do with 1,000 years from now. And speaking of clock analogies, Tim Lucas, the editor of Video Watchdog, pointed out that it was Welles who wrote the famous cuckoo clock speech in Carol Reed's The Third Man, written by Graham Greene, a film with which The Stranger has much in common.
Fanatics, but no German in his right mind can still have a taste for war.
Although in that film, the clock represents something very different, at least in the mind of a morally corrupt post-war profiteer. He believes it is only through conflict and hardship that mankind achieves its fullest potential. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, where they had 500 years of democracy and peace, what did that produce? Well, you know the rest.
Psychiatrist could explain it better. The German sees himself as the innocent victim of world envy and hatred conspired against, set upon by inferior peoples, inferior nations. He cannot admit to error, much less to wrongdoing, not the German. We chose to ignore Ethiopia and Spain, but we learned from our casualty list the price of looking the other way. Men of truth everywhere have come to know for whom the bell tolled, but not the German. He still follows his warrior gods, marching to Wagnerian strains, his eyes still fixed upon the fiery sword of Siegfried. And in those subterranean meeting places that you don't believe in, the German's dream world comes alive, and he takes his place in shining armor beneath the banners of the Teutonic Knights. Mankind is waiting for the Messiah, but for the German, the Messiah is not the Prince of Peace. He's another Barbarossa, another Hitler.
Wells's speech here is very effective, though I'm not the first critic to point out that it should be easy for Wilson to recognize Rankin's fascist tendencies. For him to go back to his room that night and declare Rankin above suspicion seems kind of misguided. The reason Rankin feels he can say these things without fear of exposure is that he cloaks his opinions in liberalism, which would excuse his speech as merely an open-minded intellectual discussion and not a reflection of his true character. At one point, Rankin brags to Meineke that his soon-to-be father-in-law is a liberal judge. So he's very consciously taking shelter in their liberal open-mindedness. But Welles, the writer, the speechmaker, the political prognosticator, himself a staunch liberal, often warned that America should not be so confident that fascism had been eradicated. The threat of its return was not merely intellectual speculation, but very real. Rankin is like the scorpion in the fable recounted in Mr. Arkadin. He cannot resist expressing his opinion of the German mentality, cannot suppress his respect and admiration for the German, even as it threatens to expose his identity.
I'm leaving Harper tomorrow.
Extraordinary, isn't it? Clocks being Mr. Wilson's hobby, too.
You can't help but compare The Stranger to Wells's other film noir titles. It's certainly darker than the others, much less playful, both in tone and in the flavor of the camera work. Maybe it's because he had very little creative freedom, or maybe it was just the context. A film about the rise of another wave of fascism, shot in 1945, featuring footage of the Nazi death camps. I think, under the circumstances, we can forgive the film for not being more fun. The Stranger was intended as a crowd pleaser, an entertainment, but a heavy one, not unlike the so-called entertainments of novelist Graham Greene, such as The Ministry of Fear, This Gun for Hire, or The Third Man. Charles Hyam comments that Conrad Meineke is a character straight out of a Graham Greene novel, and I couldn't agree more. One reason The Stranger is not more artistically reckless is that its subject matter is so deeply rooted in Wells's political beliefs that he wasn't comfortable making light of it. The war was too recent, barely over. The atom bombs were dropped on Japan while the film was in production. The Lady from Shanghai, Touch of Evil, those films were made under completely different circumstances. Yes, both touch on political issues that Welles cared about, Touch of Evil especially, but those films were not being made under a cloud, the way The Stranger was in 1946. I thought Nazis liked dogs, or maybe they only liked German shepherds. Welles is obviously trying to make us hate Rankin even more by having him kick a dog, and in a little while he'll kill the dog as well. There's a strange amount of dog abuse in the film. Beyond the kicking and killing of Red, there was, as I mentioned, a scene at the Farbright Kennels, which Meineke visits on his way to America. There was to be a shot of, quote, dogs behind the wire enclosure. Looking up, fangs bared menacingly, they gaze intently off-scene, growling continuously. The sound is vicious and without let-up. These dogs are wild, savage, starved, end quote. And a bit later in the scene, quote, we hear the sudden, loud, agonized yelping of a dog being beaten viciously, end quote. This is one of the few scenes that has a noirish feeling. Even though The Stranger has a lot of the earmarks of the genre, the film is not typically thought of as a film noir. To me, it has a lot more in common with the modern Gothic, something along the lines of Rebecca or Jane Eyre. The innocent woman who finds herself involved with a domineering man with a significant skeleton in his closet. At this point, Welles settles into sort of a conventional approach to directing the film, so I'm going to take the time to share a word about the origin of the project. As I've mentioned, The Stranger was made after the box office disappointments of Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons, when Welles felt compelled to prove himself a bankable director who didn't have to make ambitious masterpieces. In addition to these two films, he had also been working on the anthology film It's All True, which was comprised of several segments meant to dramatize life in several Pan-American countries, Brazil, Mexico, the United States, and encourage solidarity during wartime. But this project ran aground and cost Welles his position at RKO. It's important to note that from the beginning of his career, Welles saw himself as making two types of films, great masterpieces and crowd-pleasing entertainments. That's how he had worked in theater, mixing Shakespearean tragedy with playful comedies, and in radio, being the voice of the shadow and the director of the more highbrow Mercury Theater of the Air. Before he began work on Citizen Kane at RKO, he wrote a script for an espionage thriller called The Smiler with a Knife, based on the novel by Nicholas Blake. When that project fell through and he began work on Citizen Kane, he planned to produce a wartime thriller, which would be directed by Norman Foster and released under the Mercury Theater banner. The first such project was called The Way to Santiago. It was never produced. The second was Journey into Fear, which was directed by Foster, completed and released in 1943. In 1944, after leaving RKO, Welles tried to launch a film called Don't Catch Me, a romantic comedy about a pair of newlyweds caught up in a Nazi spy operation. That film was also never produced, though a number of its story elements made their way into The Lady from Shanghai. I go into all this detail because it shows that Welles wasn't slumming when he took the job of directing The Stranger. It was something that he had planned to do with his career from even before Citizen Kane. But in hindsight, it looks like a professional step down. And that misunderstanding has been one of the great injustices of how Welles's career is viewed today. Notice all these thrillers are set against a backdrop of World War II. Welles had strong political opinions and wanted to use his platform as a filmmaker to voice them. In the years just before The Stranger was made, he was using radio to express his political views. He produced and starred in Sealing Unlimited, an entertaining program that highlighted feats of aviation, emphasizing America's air power during World War II. Hello Americans is a terrific variety show, sort of like the radio version of It's All True, that celebrates Pan-American history and culture. The Stranger is a logical extension of these efforts, about which he was very passionate. Welles was brought into the project by producer Sam Spiegel. Spiegel was born in Austria-Hungary, in an area that is now Poland. He was Jewish, educated at the University of Vienna, and produced films in France and Germany in the 1930s, creating European versions of films made in Hollywood at Universal. When the Nazis took power, Spiegel fled Germany, made his way to Mexico, and eventually arrived in the United States in 1938. When he began producing films in America in 1942, he was probably a bit self-conscious about his German-sounding last name, and, as if to prove himself a patriotic American, in the extreme, he renamed himself S.P. Eagle. Beginning with The African Queen in 1951, he started using his own name and achieved a great amount of critical and box office success, with such films as On the Waterfront, The Bridge on the River Kwai, and Lawrence of Arabia. The original story was written by Victor Trevis. Back in the 40s, there was a separate category in the Oscars for original story, and The Stranger got a nomination in this category, but ultimately lost to Vacation from Marriage by Clemence Dane. For a while, the project was called Date with Destiny, but this was changed to The Stranger before shooting began. The story was further developed by a woman named Decla Dunning, a fiction writer who was published a lot in The New Yorker in the 1940s. The first draft of the screenplay was written by Anthony Weiler, who would later collaborate with John Huston on such films as Moulin Rouge, Beat the Devil, and Night of the Iguana. Welles told Peter Bogdanovich that John Huston wrote most of the script before he, Welles, was brought onto the project. But because Huston was in active military service at the time, he couldn't take screen credit for his work. Once again, we're back in one of Welles's beautiful extended takes. This one lasts more than 3 minutes. Shooting into the mirror behind Potter, we're able to see Wilson enter the scene without a separate shot of him at the door. It's fun to pay attention to the checkers game in this scene. They're playing what I call stage checkers. There's no actual game in progress, they're just moving the pieces around on the board. The checkers are scattered on different colored squares, and when Potter does the multiple jump, he bounces all across the board, not actually jumping Wilson's pieces, and not bothering to collect the captured checkers.
Well.
Give up?
No. We'll play it out. That's my privilege, 25 cents. Yeah. So,
It's a 3-minute shot, and they've got a lot of dialogue to juggle. I wouldn't expect any actor to also choreograph the moves of a checkers game within the scene. I point this out not because it's a careless error in the film, but because it gives you a little insight into the practical craft of acting. Robinson apparently didn't like working with Billy House. Welles said that he even went to the front office to complain about being teamed with a nobody for so much of the picture. Welles tells a funny story about working with Billy House, who had a long career in vaudeville but hadn't done a lot of film acting. I'll read it to you. This is from the book This is Orson Welles, comprised of interviews with Welles by Peter Bogdanovich, edited by Jonathan Rosenbaum. Quote, I'd seen Billy in burlesque and always wanted to work with him. Well, the first 3 days he was so miserable, and I thought to myself, why can't I manage to put this marvelous performer at his ease? I do rather flatter myself that I give actors a good time when they're working with me, and here was a man who was in a continual cold sweat, trembling. Then I discovered he had been eyeing the stand-in, who was, of course, another fat, bald man, and Billy, never having been in a movie, was under the impression that this stand-in was an actor waiting to take over if Billy wasn't good enough. He finally said to me, Look, if you don't like me, get the other son of a bitch and put him in. I can't stand it any longer. End quote. At the beginning of the film, at the customs station, Meineke is getting off a boat that the screenplay identifies as the SS Simon Bolivar, named after one of Welles's political heroes, a Venezuelan leader who helped overthrow the Spanish monarchy and led the fight for Latin American independence. When Potter opens the suitcase, the towel is marked the SS Cristobal. I guess it's safe to assume that was the boat that carried him on the second half of his voyage. Sam Spiegel packaged the project and sold it to executive producer William Getz. According to Charles Hyam, Spiegel intended for John Huston to direct the film and only wanted to hire Welles as an actor. Perhaps because of Huston's active military service, he was not able to direct the film, and Welles aggressively campaigned to be allowed to direct it himself. Spiegel agreed, but under the condition that if the film went over budget or over schedule, another director would be hired to finish the film, and Welles would be required to stay on as an actor. Fortunately, that didn't happen. The film was shot within budget and within its 35-day shooting schedule. Welles told Peter Bogdanovich that Getz liked the package, but was not enthusiastic about working with Spiegel as producer. But since it was an all-or-nothing offer, he agreed.
able to find out anything?
Meineke did go to Rankin's house, and your sister did see him.
Did Mary say so?
She started to. Now, your sister is a fine woman, Noah, but she must find out the kind of man she's married to.
You don't know Mary. She wouldn't listen to anything against him, much less believe.
Noah, we must arrange it so that she finds out for herself. You understand?
Yes.
One thing's certain, she knows nothing now, nothing at all. Except that he didn't want her to admit having seen someone she did see. I'd give something to know what explanation he's making right now.
I was a student in Geneva.
Rankin's confession. Dark, moody, quiet, as if he were in a confessional. And after a while, Welles pulls out to reveal that he is, in fact, in church, and is confessing not to a priest, but to Mary, who is a little too quick to offer absolution.
Before I could stop her, she stood up in the boat. Well, I dived in after her, but it was too late. She was gone. Only one person knew we were on the lake together. Her brother. He knew I hadn't murdered her.
This is a great example of how Welles controls the editing of a scene by shooting it in a single take. His monologue here is exceptional, classic Welles' understated performance. Even if Nims had wanted to shorten Welles's close-up and cut away to Loretta Young, he couldn't have, because we only see Young when Welles is in the shot, having crossed over to the other side of her. And he keeps them both in frame together through the end of the shot. So the beauty of this shot is not the length of it, it's a little longer than 3 minutes, but Welles's ingenuity of using a long take to protect the integrity of the performances. It's funny, before they leave the church, they kiss, and it's almost as though they've renewed their vows to one another.
You're a very wonderful person, Mary. I love you very much.
Oh, Charles.
Rather than go home with Mary, Rankin retires to the church tower to work on his clock. I get the feeling the two of them aren't especially intimate with one another. It's fairly obvious that he has never really loved Mary. She is more of his beard, the person who provides him with an air of respectability and enables him to conceal his dirty little secret.
You understand, don't you?
Of course I understand.
Actually, his dirty big secret.
Shall I walk you home?
No, dear, there's no need for that.
It's pretty late.
That's all right. In Harper, there's nothing to be afraid of.
That line is a little too on the nose. I think by now we've gotten the idea that Harper is a safe, wholesome, white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant town. And now we see that Rankin has gotten rid of another one of his witnesses. Among the production records at the Lilly Library at Indiana University, where Welles's papers are held, is a letter from the veterinarian who supervised the filming of this scene. No animal was harmed during the making of this film. In fact, the dog playing Red was given a sedative and is asleep when we see him here. In his letter, the veterinarian complimented the crew on the handling of the scene and expressed his gratitude that they did not show Rankin in the act of poisoning the dog. It's hard to determine what Welles wrote and what was part of the script before he signed on to direct. He claims that he wrote, quote, all the stuff in the drugstore, as well as the first 2 or 3 reels of the picture, end quote. Welles claims that he wrote most of Potter's dialogue while on the set. Dr. Jeffrey Lawrence. This was shot in one of the town square sets of Harper, and it really benefits from being shot through the glass. Not only does it establish whose office we're in and what his job is, the reflected trees and the pedestrian on the sidewalk really put you in the Connecticut environment in a way a conventional soundstage couldn't. Remember, Jeff Lawrence is the man that townsfolk believe should have married Mary instead of Rankin. We get hints of that rivalry through the story, and it's never made too obvious. Nice little surprise from Welles. All this time we've been hovering outside a second-story window. The danger of using real glass on your set. Here you get a glimpse of the camera crew, first in the window above Potter's head, and then a full-on view of them in the front window. You can see a guy with a hat wrangling cable as the dolly starts to move. I love that Welles lets them walk for a moment in silence. The background is sort of lightly peppered with action, like the bicycle bell. And then...
What does the law say about this kind of murder? Is it the same as killing a man? It ought to be. It's just as bad.
Forepaw's muddy. No mud on hind. Dry leaves mixed with the mud. Bret must have been digging somewhere in the woods.
Have you any idea what for, Mr. Wilson?
The body, I think. Meinecke's.
Another long take, this one just shy of 2 minutes in length, starting from an elevated crane, dropping down to ground level, dollying across the town square, and then craning back up at the end to look down on the two actors. Once again, proving that The Stranger is much more visually adventurous than it's given credit for being. And now we move right into another long take. This is an entire scene between Rankin and Potter that plays out in a single shot. Billy House, who plays Potter, was born in 1889, so that would have made him about 56 at the time The Stranger was being shot. He had worked in circuses, vaudeville, and burlesque. Welles implied that House was new to film when he worked on The Stranger, but House had in fact appeared in a handful of comedy shorts in the early 1930s. He appeared opposite Boris Karloff in Bedlam, which came out just before The Stranger, though it was probably filmed after The Stranger. Of course, Rankin's not really planning to leave. He's just wanting Mary to see him packing. It's just a little bit of stage action to enhance the performance he's about to give. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but as the scene goes on, you'll see Welles playing with the whole high and low thing again. At one point, Rankin sits, and Mary gets down on his level.
You are the man I've married, and that's all that matters. Darling, I meant it when I said for better, for worse.
Even to...
When he tells her that he's killed Red, she stands. And you think, for a moment, maybe she's going to have a strong enough spine to either leave Rankin, or at least stop trusting him so blindly.
No, I meant to kill him. Murder can be a chain, Mary, one link leading to another until it circles your neck. Red was digging at the grave.
That line will be echoed visually in the latter part of the film, during the tea party scene. Mary wears a black dress with pearls, and she occasionally tugs at the pearls as if they're choking her. In time, Rankin manages to talk her around, making her believe that Meinecke intended to blackmail her family. And before you know it, Rankin is looming over Mary once again, his control over the situation regained. By protecting Rankin, Mary bears some responsibility for his crimes, and now the chain is circling her neck.
They could never find me, but I loved you, and I was weak.
Darling, if one of us goes, we'll both go. You would have shared half my trouble if I'd had any. Charles, what is there to connect you with that man?
Nothing, actually. You're the only one that knows I knew him.
Well, then you need have no fear. If I'm the only one who can speak.
But Mary, in failing to speak,
Welles's plan of protecting his cut by shooting in single takes didn't always work. The scene coming up, where Meinecke's body is discovered, appears to have been shot in a single take, starting close in on Potter with the corpse in the background, and then transitioning to Wilson and Noah. But apparently the producers were disappointed that there were no wide shots establishing the exhumation site, so they shot one themselves. We can tell it was done after the fact because none of the cast is there, that's a stand-in for Billy House. Notice how clumsy the editing is here. So by providing themselves with something to cut away to, they're able to break up Welles's longer, continuous take and pretty much ruin the scene.
Well, she realizes now that whatever story he told her about Meineke was false. Noah, I think your sister should be ready to hear the truth.
Charles. Will they make me look at the body?
This scene reminds me of Citizen Kane, the way Charles Foster Kane psychologically dominates Susan Alexander Kane while they're alone in Xanadu.
I don't think I could.
The scene is very Kane-like, the way Sarah enters from the background, the overlapping dialogue, the use of heavy shadows that transform what was once a bright and comfortable home into a sort of dungeon. And then when Rankin goes to the clock and we see him silhouetted against the background, it's a shot almost worthy of Greg Toland. That's character actor Martha Wentworth as Sarah.
Suppose I should...
Should what?
I don't know. Only know I'm terrified of seeing anybody or being seen.
Mary, you must get tight hold of yourself. If you're determined to go through with this thing, you must know beforehand exactly what you're going to do and say at all times. Perfect naturalness at all times.
It was fairly common at the time for films to be promoted by radio adaptations. On December 7th, 1946, the Hedda Hopper show, This Is Hollywood, performed a 30-minute version of The Stranger, starring Edward G. Robinson and Merle Oberon in the Loretta Young role. I don't know who played Rankin, but I doubt it was Welles, or else it would have been better publicized. Unfortunately, a transcription of this live broadcast does not seem to have survived.
Just a minute and I'll see. He wants me to come over.
In the Rankin as clock metaphor, he's still holding it together. He checks the clock and things are still functioning as he wants, for now.
Is there?
No. All right, Adam, I'll be right over. Don't you think that's rather strange?
Strange? No, strange. Tell you what I'll do. I'll go over to the church and work on the clock while you're with your father. And you can by and pick me up later.
I'm so afraid. He was so pointed as wanted to see me alone, and his voice sounded so different.
Hey, you know what you're going to say, don't you?
Wilson switches off the projector, but it wasn't actually running, just the light that's supposed to suggest the projector's beam.
Come in, Mary.
Is something wrong?
Mr. Wilson is here on a very serious matter. We must try to help him every way possible.
What do you want to know, Mr. Wilson?
You know about the body that was discovered yesterday, Mrs. Rankin?
Yes.
Did you ever meet the deceased?
No, I never met him.
Have you seen the body?
No.
Well, then, how can you be sure you never met him?
Of course, I can't be certain. Mr. Wilson, do you suspect me of something? If so, what?
Of shielding a murderer. Perhaps this photograph will refresh your memory. Do you recognize this man? That is Conrad Meineke, commander in charge of one of the more efficient concentration camps. You know him, don't you? You have met him here in Harper.
No, I've never seen that man, Mr. Wilson.
Judge, would you mind putting out the lights? I've been showing you all this some films, and I'd like you to see them, too. I'm on the Allied Commission for the Punishment of War Criminals.
The footage we glimpse on screen was derived from a film called Nazi Concentration Camps, which also exists in an alternate cut called Nazi Concentration and Prison Camps. Filmmaker George Stevens oversaw the assembly of the footage in 1945, along with James Donovan and Ray Kellogg. If you're watching this film on disc, you should find excerpts of the original film, so you can see the context in which it initially appeared. This scene is very effectively played by the actors and directed by Welles. It's nice that he refrains from using music, doing nothing to dress up the authentic footage. When Wilson steps into the projected image and is silhouetted, it's a little like the newsreel sequence of Citizen Kane. For a time, Welles planned to include a shot of Conrad Meineke within the film, inserting simulated newsreel footage of him in a Nazi uniform, but he wisely chose not to. What we tend to forget today is that in the 1940s, a large percentage of the population could not believe that the Nazi death camps were real. When Alfred Hitchcock was advising on the editing of a film known today as Memory of the Camps, he told the editor to avoid anything staged that might make it appear that the atrocities themselves were faked. It wasn't that people were cynical or didn't want to believe it was real, they just simply couldn't believe something this horrible could happen on this scale in their lifetime. Billy Wilder also compiled a film of concentration camp footage known as Death Mills, one version to be shown in America and a slightly different cut to be screened in Germany, primarily to provide evidence of the camps and to convince people that it had actually happened. And that's exactly what Wilson does to Mary. He provides photographic proof of the death camps to break through her resistance. Welles first saw Nazi concentration camps in early May of 1945. At the time, he wrote a regular column for the New York Post, which was syndicated to newspapers nationwide. In his May 7th column, which appeared on May 9th in other cities, he wrote about the experience of watching this grisly newsreel. Quote, "I think you'll be glad with me that it has been made so difficult to avoid those hideous sights. They are the proof of the nightmare, the heaped-up dead in evidence, the burdened ovens, the ingenious machinery for the pit of pain, the eyeball blinking in the open grave, the tawdry skeleton that turns out to be still alive, the survivor squatting among the cadavers, opening his toothless mouth and naming the guilty without speech. Patton and Bradley, their eyes choked full of this. Eisenhower moving slowly with immense dignity through the long tableau. Then there are the Germans, the householders, the solid citizens. They are dressed like people. You recognize the costumes, a doctor, a schoolteacher, a shopkeeper, a factory foreman, a mother, stock types. But in all, a very unpersuasive masquerade. These creatures are less alive than the dead that they have been called to view and bury. The MPs are gentle with the Herrenvolk. You realize that they have need to be gentle, or they would strike them down each with a single blow. One place of torture, you will learn, was camouflaged as a madhouse. Here the most grisly of all Grand Guignol conceits was realized. Here the wardens were the lunatics. You can watch the chief of these being interviewed in the newsreels. The subject is poison. He is very businesslike. Between phrases he touches his upper lip with a fat lizard's tongue. The frown is professional. He is the man of science, called for expert consultation. The poison gives him away, and his chin, it is wet with drool. If your stomach is weak, you are the one they were after when they decided to show these films in the movie house. No, you must not miss the newsreels. They make a point this week. No man can miss. The war has strewn the world with corpses, none of them very nice to look at. The thought of death is never pretty, but the newsreels testify to the fact of quite another sort of death, quite another level of decay. This is a putrefaction of the soul, a perfect spiritual garbage." End quote. I think it's one of the most eloquent pieces that Welles ever wrote in any medium.
Protect somebody he loved, he's good.
Well, then the truth can't hurt him. Charles was not with you that afternoon, sister. I remember you saying so when you came home.
You're against him too, Adam. Yes, you are. You've never liked him. That's why you don't believe me now. Leave us alone, Adam.
He's not a Nazi. He's not one of those people. He's not. Leave us alone.
She has the facts now, but she won't accept them. They're too horrible for her to acknowledge. Not so much that Rankin could be Kindler, but that she could ever have given her love to such a creature. But we have one ally, her subconscious. It knows what the truth is and is struggling to be heard.
This line was meant to set up a lengthy dream sequence to appear later in the film, only it doesn't.
Look here, Wilson. If he's not Charles Rankin, we should be able to expose him without too much difficulty.
I'm not interested in proving that he isn't Charles Rankin. I'm only interested in proving that he's Franz Kindler.
How do you propose to do that?
Through your daughter. Unless I am mistaken, she's headed for a breakdown.
It pains me that there are splices in this print, but I felt like it would be better to just smooth over these bumps rather than bring in footage from another source, which would be inferior in terms of sharpness and visual quality, just to fill the gap of a few seconds. Sometimes that's more obtrusive than the splice. With all the splices and missing frames, this print of The Stranger runs about 1 minute shorter than a complete print. This one is 95 minutes, while an intact print runs about 96 minutes. Which brings us to a discussion of how long the film originally was. Wells himself commented that 20 minutes of material was removed. So, sometimes the, quote, uncut running time is listed as 110 minutes, sometimes 100 minutes. A Life magazine article published on June 3, 1946, around the time of the film's release, lists the running time at 99 minutes. But I don't believe there ever was a print longer than 96 minutes. Wells was probably involved in the editing up to a certain point, and the film may have been 110 minutes at that time, but I've found no evidence that this longer version was ever actually screened. So I'm sure that the original camera negative, if it's ever located, would be 96 minutes. You could theorize that International Pictures delivered to RKO a longer cut, and RKO shortened it to 96 minutes, but that's probably not the case. The print you're watching here comes from International Pictures, not from RKO. We know this because the company logo at the head is different. International Pictures provided this print to the Library of Congress for the purpose of copyright registration, and that's how it came to be preserved today. The copyright on the film was not renewed after 28 years, as was the law back then, so the film fell into the public domain. And that's why you've seen so many different versions of The Stranger on VHS and DVD through the years, and why TV prints usually look so bad. Anyone who has a beat-up 16mm print can put this film on TV or release it on video without restriction.
Yes, I'm all right. We'll face them, darling.
And when she struck that angel started marching, it was a sight to behold. Professor, you sure knocked it off. My hat's off to you.
Congratulations, Mr. Rankin.
Won't the rector be delighted?
What I want to know is, if she's going to chime all night long, how's the body going to get any sleep?
We'll face them, darling. All of them.
Them chickens of yours are going to be on and off the roost every 15 minutes.
That's a good one, Mr. Potter.
Nice use of costume here. Now that Mary is essentially protecting a Nazi, she is wearing black, and cringes when she steps into the light, almost like a vampire.
Sarah, I've told you I want these curtains drawn. I don't like the sunlight streaming in. It's bad for them.
Miss Mary, that's rubbish and you know it. Up at the other house, we never close the curtains.
That has nothing to do with it. This is my house and I want them drawn.
Well, suit yourself then. It's going to look mighty gloomy for the party.
Is it that time already?
Were you able to see when they opened the grave, Mr. Randall? Was it too horrible?
Well, not the most pleasant sight.
Oh, there's Mary. Hello, Mary.
And now that the clock is tolling again, you can sort of tell it's wearing on people's nerves. Potter made a wisecrack about it when the clock first started to chime, but now it's coming true. As Rankin moves into the foreground, it would have been nice to have some deep focus photography here, but That was not something Mehdi was able to deliver on this kind of budget. So he kind of splits the difference, so that really neither one of them is in focus. And then when Rankin exits, you can see them rack focus to Potter. I love how Welles accentuates the closed curtains in the party scene. A great metaphor for Mary trying to conceal something, blocking out the light of truth.
Waiting for a new victim.
I hope you haven't forgotten you were kind enough to invite me, Mrs. Rankin.
Oh, no, of course not, Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Potter asked me to deliver this.
Oh, the ice cream is good. Sarah's waiting for it.
Jeffrey Lawrence hands Wilson a drink, and, as if to remind us that Lawrence is a doctor, Wilson says,
"Oh, just the medicine I need."
Ba-dum-dum.
Of course. How are you, Doctor?
Excuse me. Yes, surely. Grandma Lawrence, can I get you something else?
Oh, nothing more, thank you, dear.
It's too intelligent to do away with the residents of
Where's Dr. Rankin?
Oh, he'll be here in just a few minutes.
I want to have a word with him about that clock.
Yes.
Nice cameo here by Erskine Sanford, about the only member of the Mercury Theater to appear in the film. I don't know what kind of accent Sanford's trying to use here, but it's not quite working.
There may well be 10 or a dozen graves out there in those woods.
Sanford had been Mr. Carter, the flustered newspaper man in Citizen Kane, and Roger Bronson in The Magnificent Ambersons. Bronson was the guy who young George Amberson punches in the stomach and tells to go to hell, although they don't say hell in the movie.
Hello there, Rankin.
How are you, Mr. Wilson?
You know the quotation?
To heaven?
Emerson.
Quotation?
Commit a crime and the earth is made of glass.
The Emerson quotation comes from his essay Compensation, first published in 1841.
Commit a crime, and it seems as if a coat of snow fell on the ground, such as reveals in the woods the track of every partridge and fox and squirrel and mole. You cannot recall the spoken word. You cannot wipe out the foot track. You cannot draw up the ladder so as to leave no inlet or clue.
You're Mr. Wilson, aren't you? Do you know you're our #1 suspect in our murder case?
Oh?
So far, you're the only suspect. Potter put the finger on you. He thinks you committed the crime to get possession of some priceless antique.
I think Rankin said it best when he said,
Murder can be a chain, Mary, one link leading to another until it circles your neck.
Mary finally starts to crack, and Loretta Young brings a welcome new dimension to the character. Geez, look at those eyebrows. Sometimes an HD master reveals more than an actor would have wanted it to. There had been signs earlier that she was beginning to lose faith in Rankin, but now she realizes she's trapped. Whether she's going to be his victim or his accomplice is yet to be seen.
May I help you, dear?
No! 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 No!
Mary.
No!
Mary.
It's been said that The Stranger was the only Welles film to earn a profit upon its initial release, which is really sad, but certainly shouldn't be a reason to dismiss the film. A poster circulated after the release of the film encapsulates some of the reviews that appeared in the trade press. Film Daily called it, quote, a production that could not have been improved upon. Variety said, class melodrama, tops in thrills and chills with heavy box office potential. Motion Picture Herald proclaimed, Welles does best acting of his career. Robinson surpasses himself. Suspense mounts to unbearable heights. Box Office magazine considered the film, quote, handsomely produced, effectively written, certainly richly endowed to score solidly in popularity and profits. Like the scene earlier of Mary in the wedding dress, this is another one of Welles's formal compositions, the closest to the kind of deep focus photography you got in Kane. He's shooting upwards towards the ceiling, something Welles did a lot on Kane, but did less frequently as the years went on. Mary's restless sleep, and that darn bell. And now we have Rankin functioning like clockwork, creating a timetable for himself, writing in all caps, "Establish time," just so we know what's going on here. Over and over, Welles will reiterate the importance of time, the chiming of the clock, the alarm bell we hear just before class begins, the clock we see hanging on the wall, the watch Rankin draws from his pocket.
Today we will attempt to finish with the career of Friedrich the Grosser, König von Preußen.
Welles said he would have preferred that the students of the Harper School for Boys be just that, boys, about age 12. But the heaviness of the subject matter and the industry regulations that govern child labor made the producers opt for students 18 and over. Some of the boys in the classroom scene look like they're well outside of their teens.
Hello?
Oh, Mary.
I know, some people like this little bit of business a lot, the thing with the notepad. But to me it's just too obvious. I wish that Welles had found some way to be more clever about it. But I do love how Potter has posted notes in just about every conceivable place within the store.
Understand?
Yes, I understand.
I don't want anybody to know that you're going there. Mary, don't tell anybody.
The quality of this HD master is so sharp that you can see the glue holding Welles's mustache in place. After we see Rankin in the phone booth, Welles pulls out to reveal that we're in Potter's store and gives us this wonderful shot through the plate glass window of the town square and the church.
Yes, sir. Stack that wood down over the rest of it and then get back to work.
Yes, sir.
Poor Mr. Peabody, the whole movie he gets bossed around by Potter. That's Italian-born actor Pedro Soso,
Watch that, Mr. Peabody.
who mostly played butlers and bit parts. Welles had probably seen House on Broadway in White Horse Inn, which was a musical comedy that ran from October 1936 to April 1937 at the Center Theater. Prior to that, House was in Murder at the Vanities in the 1933-34 season, and that was just about the time Welles arrived in New York and began working with the Catherine Cornell Company as an actor.
What is it, Sarah?
Well, I don't know.
If you've got something to say, say it. What is it, Sarah?
Sarah would have been a great role for Agnes Moorehead. You get a sense of Moorehead coming through in a few scenes. Welles originally wanted Moorehead to play the role of Wilson, the Edward G. Robinson role, but that got shot down quickly by the producers. And I'm sure that after she was vetoed from playing the lead, neither Moorehead nor Welles wanted her to take such a minor role. Again, this scene is all shot in a single continuous take, running a little more than 2 minutes, with lots of camera movement and complicated character blocking. I say it was shot in a continuous take, but that's not how it appears here. In a moment, you'll see Loretta Young turn and put her back against the door. Sarah has a hysterical fit and collapses. The editor, Ernest Nims, wants to cut Sarah out of that shot, but couldn't. And so what he does is really clumsy. He cuts into the same shot, but one that has been enlarged on an optical printer. Suddenly the image goes fuzzy and grainy because we've basically blown up the shot in order to crop out the character of Sarah. And then after Sarah's collapse, we cut back to the original shot. For a long time I couldn't figure out why they did this. I thought maybe there was a goof in Wentworth's performance that they needed to cut around, but were unable to do so because Welles had provided them with no coverage. But the answer lies in the book This Is Orson Welles, in which he tells the story of the producers wanting to insert a close-up of Loretta Young in a particular scene, a scene comprised of one long take. Spiegel really wanted the close-up, but Young, knowing that Welles was shooting his film in long takes for a reason, refused to appear in the close-up. She even got her agent involved to help her stand her ground. As Welles said, quote, "Imagine getting a star's agent to ensure that she wouldn't get a close-up," end quote. So the close-up was never filmed. But, as we just saw, Spiegel got his close-up anyway, forcing it out of the scene, contrary to Welles and Young's wishes. And it looks crappy. Now, with all this talk of Welles shooting the stranger in continuous takes, Lest you think he isn't capable of shooting a scene to be intricately cut together, watch this one. It's beautifully cut, and it's clearly comprised of individual components that are designed to interlock with one another. And shooting within one set, Potter's drugstore, facing another set, the church, really pays off here, as we have the action playing out in two locations in a single shot. Combine that with the chatty librarians, some complicated dolly moves, and focus pulling, and you have a really tightly orchestrated scene.
You know what you are, Mr. Rankin. You're the absent-minded professor.
We didn't have time to talk about it before, but I'll tell you now a little more about the missing footage from the opening reel. Meineke, released from prison in Czechoslovakia, makes his way to the far-bright kennels, where attack dogs are being trained by Nazis in hiding. I don't know if it's true or not, but the role of Farbright, who runs the barbaric dog kennel, was played by Brother Theodore, that is, Theodore Gottlieb, the performance artist who's best remembered today for his straight-faced pronouncements of doom on the early years of the Late Night with David Letterman program. He played a few parts in Hollywood in 1946 and 47, so I guess it is possible. Now you really want to see the lost footage, don't you? Yeah, so do I. Meineke is received by Farbright, another former Nazi, and follows him up into the secret hideout. To make sure Meineke is telling the truth about his release, Farbright turns him over to a Dr. Faber, a sinister doctor who injects Meineke with a sedative, a truth serum, and questions him about his past and the circumstances of his release. Senora Marvalis follows him to a morgue. Her husband calls Wilson and says, quote, "He is now at the morgue, senor. Do not be surprised if he remains there. From his appearance, it's where he belongs." End quote. The morgue is full of corpses, and there we meet Guinatsu, the man who destroys Meineke's old passport and provides him with a new one. And it's at this point that Senora Marvalis' corpse is brought in. Then there's a brief scene of Wilson on the phone, apologizing to her husband about her death. He says, quote, "I'm terribly sorry, Senor Marvalis. There's nothing else I can say." End quote. At that point, he squeezes the pipe in his hand so hard that it snaps. And that, according to the original script, is how Wilson was supposed to break his pipe. The fact that Wilson breaks his pipe at different points in the script is perplexing, and there are two explanations. One, these scenes were never filmed, and it was decided that Wilson would break his pipe in the opening scene instead. Or, and here it gets complicated, two, the morgue scene was filmed, Spiegel and Nims decided it should be cut, but needed to establish the breaking of the pipe. And so they reshot the scene in the War Crimes Commission office and added the broken pipe. This would have been done after Welles left the project, which would then explain why the set looks so plain compared to the rest of the film, and why you have the blatant goof of showing the studio floor through the office window. But that's a lot of trouble to go through, reshooting the scene in the War Crimes Commission office, as well as several inserts, when it would have been so much easier to just leave the morgue scene intact. But we don't really know. It's not clear how much of the Meineke scenes were actually filmed. We do know that they weren't all filmed. In an interview that appeared in the magazine American Cinematographer, editor Ernest Nims said he convinced Welles not to shoot all the material, as it would end up on the cutting room floor anyway. Nims said, quote, "I suggested eliminating 32 pages of the script, including the first 16. He was very pleased with this, inasmuch as he had a reputation at that time of being a very costly and rather unmanageable director. He was very anxious to correct this impression, so he was enthused about this idea of cutting scenes prior to shooting." End quote. My guess is that Welles appreciated Nims's insight into what was destined for removal before filming began, but I hardly think enthused is the word to sum up Welles's attitude at that point. And Welles, trying to play by the rules, agreed. Shooting scenes that were almost certainly going to be cut was the kind of thing Welles was trying to avoid, to patch up his image as being self-indulgent and extravagant with other people's money.
Call him and tell him not to go.
Well, I can't. I talked to him over...
Call him, I say!
He's gone!
If he dies, his blood will be on your hands.
What are you saying?
It's your meddling that's done this.
Would have been all right if it wasn't for you. So that you had to be here. On that day.
It's a little strange that we don't get a shot of Rankin hitting the clock. The jangling chimes are the first sign that the former Franz Kindler is finally starting to lose some of his precious metronomic control over himself and over others. Maybe it's the shoulder pads or the lipstick, but Loretta Young has a serious Joan Crawford moment here. We're supposed to think, for a moment, that Rankin has actually killed her with the fireplace poker. The carefully timed cutaway to the car, then cutting back to the poker on the floor, the swinging door, the expectant faces of Noah and the others. And only then are we relieved to see that Mary is alive and well, and hopefully now ready to stand up to Rankin. Now at this point, there is a crucial scene missing from the film that was in the screenplay, what it calls an impressionistic montage. And the sequence is described as follows. In Mary's eyes, the room tilts crazily. Noah catapults toward the camera, his face filling the screen. Superimposed over this is the strong black silhouette of a high ladder. This falls with Noah and stops with him, just ahead of his face. He grasps a rung of the ladder. It breaks and Noah falls out of scene. Camera tilts to follow his hands. They clutch first at one rung, then at another. Rung after rung shatters under his weight. Finally, a rung holds, the last. Beneath it, the two shafts of the ladder stretch down into space like a pair of cosmic stilts. Red, the dog, is at the base of this lunatic machine, seen very distantly because Mary's delirious eye is viewing this scene from a great height. He howls furiously and claws at the foot of the shaft. His baying echoes and merges strangely with the music. Noah, clinging to the last rung, looks as if he were treed. But now, camera closes in on him and shows us suddenly that it's not Noah after all. It is Rankin. We enter Mary's dream completely. Rankin looks into our eyes. Rankin says, "You need have no fear." He is still clinging perilously to the last rung of the ladder. "You won't fall. You won't fall. Fall. Fall." The camera moves in, quote, until only one of his eyes fills the screen monstrously. Rankin's voice repeats something from earlier. Failing to speak, you become part of the crime. With these hands, the same hands that have held you close to me, the hands stand for progress, which would not occur by fits and starts but according to the laws of harmonic motion. Rankin's eye grows, so only the pupil remains and changes queerly into the face of a clock. Rankin's voice is heard, repeating, "My first impression of Harper was the incongruity of a Gothic clock in a Connecticut church tower." When Mary finally climbs to the top of the tower, she's overcoming one of her personal fears. In the deleted scene in which Rankin first meets Mary, walking in the park, which may or may not have actually been filmed, she refuses to cross the footbridge over the pond because she is afraid of heights. Rankin calms her fears and coaxes her across the bridge, and that's one of the main reasons she is attracted to him. He makes her feel safe.
I needed the excuse. I was afraid you wouldn't let me up.
What do you want?
came to kill you.
In Welles's manipulation of vertical space, the clock tower is the ultimate higher ground, and it's only fitting that the climax of the film should play out there. The tower was built especially for the film, and when we see the interior, as with many of the Harper sets, we're actually inside that tower, this tall rectangular box. The benefits of this are that it allowed Welles to shoot up or down the length of the tower, with all four sides enclosed, as opposed to the traditional three-walled set that would have been constructed on a soundstage. The downside of the set is that all four sides were enclosed, so there was no place for Russell Meddy to have his G&E crew hang the lights. There are basically three openings through which light could be aimed: a doorway at the bottom, a window in the middle, and at one point we get a nice silhouette of Noah against the window panes, and the opening at the top. As a consequence of having so few places for lights, the tower interior is dimly lit, with only a few small pools or streaks of light, which is fine in the end, because the starkness of the lighting enhances the Gothic atmosphere. According to Charles Hyam's book, The Films of Orson Welles, the clock tower and statuary were not constructed for the film, but were brought out of storage from the Los Angeles County Museum. The components had supposedly adorned a clock tower at the LA County Courthouse until 1922. But I looked at pictures of the clock on the courthouse from 1920 and 1900, and it's definitely not the same clock. But I don't doubt that it's an authentic clock. It had to be lifted by crane and placed in position on the tower set. As I've pointed out previously, the clock was also placed in a studio for some of the scenes to minimize risk to the actors and allow Russell Meddy some place to plant a camera. Final thoughts about The Stranger. I think the important thing to take away is that it wasn't a simple work-for-hire project. It was the kind of picture that Welles wanted to make from the beginning of his film career, a thriller that reflected his wartime political views. And it was a project that helped him shed the mantle of temperamental genius and ushered him into a new stage of his career, where he balanced genre thrillers, such as The Lady from Shanghai and Touch of Evil, with more highbrow projects, such as Macbeth and Othello. And we see in The Stranger that Welles is learning how to play the Hollywood game, becoming more strategic in dealing with producers and studios, signing away his right to final cut, but then finding ways to thwart those who might tamper with his film. It was a sort of professional sleight of hand that Welles would continue to cultivate for years. And finally, Rankin, the clockwork man, loses control and falls victim to the very thing that had previously defined him. It's very appropriate, though maybe a bit too obvious, that he is impaled upon the sword of an angel and then falls from a terrific height. But it's the inevitable end to the character, since Welles has spent so much time cultivating the visual metaphors of clock and height. The closing dialogue is a little different between the film and the screenplay. Welles's draft of the script had something much more political. After Rankin falls from the tower, Dr. Lawrence says, "Seems like the war is over in Connecticut." Potter replies, "Do tell, you're all crazy." "Well, I'll get him a good ladder, he's had enough trouble. And they say accidents always come in threes." Wilson adds, "In threes? What about world wars?" "Mr. Potter, I devoutly hope and pray you're wrong. Good night, Mary. Pleasant dreams." This is Bret Wood. Thanks for listening.